The more complicated world problems become, the more important it is for us to do everything possible to simplify our own relationships with life. A tremendous amount of energy is lost in the mere confusion of complication. Even though we may gradually solve whatever the confusion may be, we have used energy and we have used time. And life as we know it is a problem in time and energy. And to achieve the maximum of security and happiness and usefulness, we must try to conserve our resources. We have noticed for the last 25 years how the tempo of life has increased, and the individual has not really been able to adjust to this increase successfully. We realize that in the last 2.5 decades, we have become more and more dependent upon artificial means of vitality support. We have become addicted to every type of vitamin that there is known. We require continual use of stimulant or sedational material, both these indicating that we are not able to cope successfully with the pressure of conditions. The pressure of conditions must also be regarded as a compound of the prevailing confusion. The more confused we become, the more difficult our environment becomes. And the individual confusion finally summarizes itself or masses itself into vast patterns of collective confusion. While it is not possible for us to create any code that we can require others to follow, thus adding to a general simplification, we must, to the best of our ability, prevent ourselves from falling into the prevailing dilemma. Simplification must never be interpreted as compromise. We do not want to simplify things by losing values. We do not want to follow lines of least resistance at the expense of principles. But we do want to, first of all, get our principles straight. The individual who really has an internal organization, whose beliefs are well set, whose ideals are clear to himself, already has a strong defense against the uncertainties of his times. So by simplification we mean organization of values, that the person decides in his own mind that which he shall do and what he shall not do, what he can do and what he cannot do, and having come to certain clear internal directives, he must learn to apply these directives to the circumstances which arise around him. Thus, simplification is self-leadership over circumstances. It is the individual charting a course and staying on that course. It takes much less energy to stay on a course than it does to find it again after it has been lost. So we try in every way possible to remove useless, valueless, worthless kinds of pressure. Pressures that even if we succeeded in all the things we want to do, or that these pressures invite us to attempt to do, we would probably be very little better off than we are today. So we are not looking for simplification in the giving up of value, but in the clarification of value. We are looking for a way of life in which we recognize what is good and stay with it, not allowing ourselves to be lured into some confused state which is going to require more energy than we can afford to expend. If this is true of all persons, it is especially true of those who are growing older, whose energy supplies are therefore less adequate, and whose lives have become increasingly more burdened. We find as we get older that time moves more rapidly than ever before, that we have less and less time to do the things that we really want to accomplish. Our interests have become richer and fuller. Our responsibilities have increased in number. We are surrounded with more inducements to activity. We are called upon more and more by those who may respect our wisdom or understanding or experience. Therefore, as we go along the road, simplification is the secret of preserving health and vitality for the longest possible period of time. To do all these different things that are necessary to straighten out life, we have to begin with all the minor problems, the ordinary common problems of our time and living. One thing we also learned is that we have a greater skill in handling important critical situations than we have in administering nuisance situations. If we are faced with a major decision in life, it seems as though something comes along and gives us guidance. The major decision calls for all our resources. We gather ourselves together, sit down, and use the best that we know to solve it. The result is that many times the greatest decisions, the greatest changes, the greatest integrations that we achieve take the least energy. We are more or less sure of what we are doing or what is necessary, and we proceed accordingly. The greatest of all wasting factors is that of minor problems. Problems that are not very clear in themselves, that lead to ends that are not very certain. Things which come along as endless minor irritations. Against these we must be ever watchful, because this endless wasting away of small amounts of energy will in the end deplete our major resources. If we study the allotments of body energy as we find these in the human personality, we become aware of nature's intention. And it is, of course, the wisdom of nature that we shall use our energy as wisely as possible, conserve it as much as we can, and never assume for a moment that the resources that we have are unlimited. They are all limited by many problems and many circumstances. The energy allotments of different persons differ. Some individuals seemingly can stand far more burden and responsibility and irritation than others. We have undoubtedly learned from experience something of our own allotment. We find how quickly things tire us, and we gradually learn what kind of things tire us most. And if we make such discoveries, we should put this information away and keep it where we can get at it, because it is the secret of our ability to conserve energy. Ordinarily speaking, we do have, however, enough energy for the things that most need doing. But very often our energy follows our inclinations rather than our needs. Thus we do have energy often for projects that are not actually very important. And at the same time we get a strange sense of fatigue when we are confronted with problems or responsibilities that may be necessary but which we do not particularly want to assume. Energy follows desire very closely. That is one of the reasons we must guard our energy, because the fulfillment of our desires can often be a very exhausting thing, often impossible in substance, even though we struggle desperately to achieve it. To begin with, then, energy is most wasted perhaps in conflict. Wherever it is possible to remove conflict, either internal or environmental, we are making a major gain. Conflict may arise from situations outside of ourselves, but it may also, and frequently does arise, from within us or from our own reaction to conditions around us. I know more persons who have exhausted a complete life of vitality simply trying or laboring with situations that they have created for themselves, creations of their own mental and emotional pressures, which should never have existed at all. One of the common experiences we have in this field, and of course at this season of the year, it is particularly obvious, and that is the amount of energy we can waste over religious criticism. The amount of energy that we can deplete ourselves of in our worries and anxieties about people whose religious beliefs are different from ours. In families, this can be a very trying and exhausting thing, and a profitless waste of resources. If we could simplify our thinking to this very basic philosophical principle, that a religion is finally a way of life, that an individual is religious who keeps principles, and that above all sectarian considerations must be elevated the fact of conduct. If the individual is keeping the rules of life as wisely, as lovingly, and as skillfully as he knows, we do not need to worry very much about the church he goes to. If he is not keeping these rules, it makes very little difference which church he goes to. He is still in trouble. So we can get out of our minds worries, fears, and anxieties about these abstract things that we cannot do anything about even at best. And yet many persons have ruined their lives worrying about abstract values which they cannot control and about which they have no clear insight even themselves. Another very desperate way of wasting energy is to try to control, dominate other people. The desperate determination to rule the life or activity of others. The resolution to take leadership where this leadership is not required, requested, or desired can also lead to a very serious depletion of resources. Not only do we have the actual energy loss as such, but we have the continual unhappiness, and all forms of unhappiness are debilitating. The individual becomes weakened through the use of energy in the simple process of being miserable. So whatever in life we are doing, if we are miserable about it, it is shortening our lives and injuring our health. We must gradually recognize what nature wants and what nature is trying to tell us from the cradle to the grave. And that is that nature wants us to live at peace with ourselves and others. If we do not achieve this peace, we must pay for it in devitalization in some way. For the absence of peace is discord, and discord uses up energy. All forms of discord deplete and destroy life resources. Nature has never rewarded confusion, except with more confusion. Nature has never allowed the individual to be a dictator or a tyrant without ultimately impoverishing him. And after all, we must recognize that above all codes that we are capable of formulating ourselves is the inevitable code of cause and effect. We see around us the inevitable consequences of action. Therefore, we must keep this basic code. For some reason, man from the beginning has rebelled against this. He has almost always determined in some way to impose his own will upon the face of nature. He wants to do things his way. He assumes that nature does not know what it needs, what it wants, or what it must have. It is up to man to decide these things. So man has gone valiantly and rather arbitrarily along, trying to correct the common mistakes that the infinite has made. This is a hard job. It can use up a great deal of time and energy, peace of mind, and in the long run, man cannot win. It is possible that if all those down through the ages who have tried to impose their own will upon infinite will survived or could now communicate with us from some other bond to which they have gone, we might get some valuable testimony on this problem. But the individual, in his desperate determination to live his own life, finally comes to the end and tips into the grave and is silent, and we never know what his final thoughts are on any subject. We do not know to what degree he may ultimately come into the possession of the understanding of the mistake of his own attitude. But because he perishes without confessing, we do not gain the instruction from him we might otherwise receive. In our daily thinking, then, we begin with the commonest problems of energy conservation. And one of these is the quick, easy, natural acceptance of situations that arise. Acceptance where it is obvious that there are no values more important than acceptance. If we must compromise value in order to accept, then we may pause. But where the project itself is comparatively meaningless, then to accept it easily and naturally and graciously is to save time and energy. We know this in the innumerable small interruptions that come along. These interruptions are not nearly so dangerous or detrimental as the mental and emotional stress of interruption within ourselves. It is very common today for our plans to miscarry. We have something that we intend to do, conditions arise, and it seems unreasonable or difficult for us to do according to our original program. If what we intended to do was of great moral, ethical, spiritual value, then we may accept confusion as the price of achievement. We may realize that in this case we must stand firm against compromise. But there are so few things that we do in life that are that important. Usually confusion is nothing more than the common interferences of an involved social system. And where the problems are of no great meaning, no real vital importance, then our basic solution for them is a quiet acceptance of interruption. The ability, for example, for the individual to experience interruption without his own consciousness being interrupted. The problem of not regretting the things that happened, and not gaining any unreasonable attitude about pressures and circumstances, but quietly accept them and follow the ancient adage or the ancient thought, suffer these things to be so now, they too shall pass away. Things that we graciously and quietly accept do pass away. If they are not important, they do not cause too much concern. But if we become constantly nervously bound to these interruptions, then the things do not pass away, but we pass away out of the stress, shock, and strain of our struggle with inevitables. Another very wonderful thing to help us along the path of simplification is a sense of humor. The individual who can laugh off minor problems, who can suddenly recognize the ridiculousness of the situations and of his own involvement in them, who can suddenly realize that these things are simply not important, that they're all a little ridiculous, will often find a great deal of release if he can learn to laugh at himself. One of the great causes of debility in this world is that we take ourselves too seriously. Take the things that we do with such tremendous sense of self-importance that we wear out even contemplating this self-importance. We just are unable to quietly go along the course of years. We have to fight things. We have to win battles. There's only one battle all of us have to win, and that's the last one. And it is always this that we should bear in mind. Also, it is important in the contemplation of these problems to think in the terms of the reduction of nuisances. Too many things that we have, too many projects that we try to carry, too many attitudes that we desperately cling to, have little more than nuisance value. They never will amount to anything. They become simply habitual reactions. And we develop many negative attitudes simply by habit. We no longer really regard the values or the factors. We always have reacted in a certain way, so we always will. We have always wasted time and energy, so we keep right on doing it. We do not realize that there are many nuisance situations that we never need to be part of. These nuisance situations may seemingly be important to other people, but if they are not important to all concerned, they are not basically valuable. So we can look for ways of reducing nuisance. And one of the basic ways of achieving this end is to simplify ways of life, to simplify the way we live. The individual who is living outside of simplicity as far as his own problems are concerned is simply contributing to his own premature end. The person, for example, who living alone lives in a very large house is simply asking for exhaustion. He is trying to maintain some kind of a social front or something of that nature, or has become accustomed to the idea that he has to live this way. But he is paying for it. He is paying for it with energy. Whereas if he would simplify his arrangements, he would do a great deal to save time and energy. In old days, when it was possible to maintain a serving class, perhaps this large house provided employment for many people. Today it merely provides exhaustion for the owner. There is simply no need for this type of thing. Arrange your life so that there is nothing wasted in the form of life resources. In the old days, many individuals became vast accumulators of knickknacks. I have known cases where it required several loads of a large moving van company to take things from one place to another that should never have been owned in the first place. This is a great loss of time, and now a great loss of money, and the individual who pays for it has to worry about the money or earn it, and therefore he should use it more wisely. There are too many memento mori floating around, things that we keep simply because they belong to somebody in the last generation. We dust them, repair them, take care of them, move them, store them, take them out of storage, put them back in again. And when we get through, what happens? When our own day comes and we leave all this behind to the executor of the estate, he takes it out back and burns it. We might as well anticipate this. We might as well burn it while we still have some energy with which to survive it, rather than to let it gradually contribute to our own disintegration. Now, in the simplification of this type of thing, we can preserve what is truly meaningful. No one wants to suggest that anyone gives up things that they really want or that they really regard as necessary or valuable. But we may hope that some people will learn to re-educate their sense of values. that they will gradually learn not to hold on to things, not to want things which are in themselves useless. It is much better to clear this entire situation before it makes life increasingly complicated for ourselves. Another problem is that no matter how much worldly goods we store up, we are apt to store up still more emotional and mental baggage. This also can be totally useless. First of all, it may relate to things which are uniquely of this world. Therefore, we're not going to be able to take them with us anyway. And any thoughts or emotions that we cannot take with us are no more valuable than physical goods that we cannot take with us. We haven't spoken to a certain relative for 20 years, and every time we think of them, we become so depleted we have to take a new vitamin pill. We might as well get over this now. We might as well realize that unless the things we carry in our thoughts and emotions are good enough to live with in eternity, they're not good enough to live with here today. By gradually relaxing away from these pressures, we achieve a great deal of good for ourselves. People will say, however, that we can't give up these feelings. We have them. We've had an antagonism for half a lifetime. How are we suddenly going to get over it? We can get over it, but we can only get over it by outgrowing it. We can only get over it if somewhere along the line a little flash of insight occurs within ourselves by which our own attitude is basically changed. We cannot get over despising someone if we really continue to loathe them. There's no answer here. But if we gradually realize behind this situation the uselessness of our own attitude, if it dawns on us that we are only wasting energy, and that actually, if the other person doesn't like us and really wishes us to have a bad time in life, there's no better way that he can accomplish this than to hope that we will keep on hating him. Because if we do this, we will ruin our lives, but we may not ruin his in any way. So we have to give up these things, otherwise we give all authority to our adversary. We achieve the very ends which someone who dislikes us might hope we will come to. And that is, we will ruin our own happiness. So in order to rescue ourselves from such dilemmas, we have to sit down and think and feel beyond them. We have to get over them as forces in our own consciousness. One way to find a great new vitality is suddenly to awaken and realize that we have accepted life, that we have accepted people as they are. We have not demanded the impossible. We have not built from a wrong philosophy which caused us to expect the impossible. We have not endowed them with virtues which they never possessed, nor have we endowed them with vices which are exaggerated beyond any reasonable degree. We have finally adjusted to the circumstances of life. We realize that other people will have their own thoughts, whether we like it or not. And we stop trying to react violently to the thinking of any other person. Another problem that arises with simplification is that simplicity is closely related to beauty. Wherever true beauty exists, we observe law and order. And we notice that nature, in the presentation of beauty, follows very definite canons and laws. That beauty is something which is perhaps most clearly revealed through simplicity. Therefore, that everywhere in life, the dignity of living, the happiness of living, the beauty of living, these are related to simplicity. To freeing the person from all the complications which come from lack of insight into what constitutes beauty. We've had a great deal of discussion and debate about these things through the years, and as we all watch the old city of Los Angeles disappearing in front of us, as we all observe the grand old houses that were considered works of beauty and a joy forever 50 years ago, disappearing with all their gingerbread and domes and cupolas and things of that nature, we have a touch of nostalgia. We say that certainly these new orange crates that are being built in their place can scarcely be regarded as things of beauty. We are right, in a sense, both ways. To the individual with the highly cluttered mind of the Victorian era, clutter was beauty. To the extreme modernist who has lost all sense of value, that which is completely devoid of any proportion, value, or symmetry is now regarded as beauty. In both instances, there is no real appreciation of value. We do not find in the simplicity that is now being developed an artistic simplicity. We find a barrenness. And that is what we have to watch also in our own thinking, that simplification does not lead to barrenness. That is not the end. Simplification leads to grace and insight and design and order, but all things in a very quiet, simple way. One way, for example, to understand this point is to realize that, in a sense, where we live, the way we live, all these types of things are in some way frames upon ourselves. A good picture takes a proper frame and is better for it. An interesting person is better in a setting that is suitable to their nature. But when the setting completely dominates the individual, we are lost. And I know a good many cases where persons are simply overwhelmed by what they have. They are insignificant, unimportant human beings living in the midst of significance and importance which is not really their own. Things they have bought, things they have accumulated. The individual who has very little actual quality in his own soul, trying to get a certain reflected glory from the fact that he owns a $500,000 painting. He doesn't understand the painting. He develops a terrible inferiority complex every time he looks at it. But at the same time, he seems to believe or feel that in some way this is status, that it makes him important. And in the desperate effort to have things make us important, we go into debt, we become overwhelmed with possessions, we gain too many responsibilities, we may even assume too much debt in the desperate effort to have things build us up. The fact of the matter is they do the exact reverse. For when people see us against this tremendous tapestry of things, our own insignificance becomes only more apparent. We are not a success in this. We do not actually deceive anyone except another person who is making the same mistake that we are. So we search for what the Oriental calls the Shabu quality. We search for that kind of setting which becomes a gracious background for a human being. If the human being is unable to maintain himself against this background, then the challenge is to him. If he finds that he cannot survive his wallpaper, then it is necessary for him to consider the survival quality of his own nature. It is necessary for him to realize that the only way in which he can come finally to the management of his domicile is through the development of a strength of character by which what he has becomes merely a setting for what he is. This process of trying to constantly redecorate a home every few months, this endless irritation in which the person feels himself out of place among his own possessions, is another form of exhaustion. It wears us out trying to compete with things or possessions which are not suited to us. So we find that the wise person, the thoughtful person, the intelligent person simplifies his environment, but does so graciously, so that in the end he will have that which best reveals him, best sustains him, not that which at any time or for any reason overwhelms him. If he is overwhelmed, he is lost. And too many people today are overwhelmed. In fact, the whole world is overwhelmed by the physical situations that have arisen. Man is getting lost in the universe of his own achievements. Man is no longer able to use his background properly. It has moved into the foreground and destroyed him. This conflict does cause nervousness, tension, unhappiness, and I know many people who have been made very ill by it. So we take hold of these situations and we try to the best of our ability to handle them more intelligently and more valuably for all concerned. In the process of simplification, we have to realize also that exactitude is a great labor saver. There are many ways of approximating something, but nearly all trial and error methods result in exhaustion of resource. The individual who knows exactly what he is doing can do it quickly. The individual who knows exactly what he means can say it simply. But the person who is not quite sure must drown his uncertainties in a sea of words. So always the individual who gains a certitude of realization within himself can do things simply. When we know exactly what is necessary, we can achieve this end with a minimum of effort on our own part. But when we are not sure, we must try too hard. We must work too long. We must correct too many mistakes that we ourselves make as we go along. And all of this is energy wasting, resource destroying. As we become more and more nervous and tense under the pressure of circumstances, if we do not have resources within ourselves, we have to develop excessive escape mechanisms. The individual who reaches a degree of tension in which he must be at something every minute gradually destroys all of his energy resources. It takes energy to drive a freeway. It takes energy to activate any social project of importance. It takes energy to entertain friends. It takes energy to go out and be entertained by other friends. The energies required for the various social activities of life today are so excessive that it means that we must think these things through very carefully and decide what we really want to do. To do those things which best express and best reveal our own basic needs. So the person who finds it necessary to constantly escape or extrovert from some pressured situation that has arisen within himself must begin to study the conservation of his own resources. To do this, he must begin to eliminate useless activities. Now, I know there's a great problem we have here in California of where people live. They live great distances from their employment. They do this in order to achieve certain ends. Let's consider for a moment just what this means in terms of energy exhaustion. Not long ago, an experiment was made scientifically which proved that it required more nervous energy to drive the freeway than it did to put a man in orbit. It was less mental, emotional, physical strain to be shot into the stratosphere than to go along a few miles of local traffic. This means that whether we realize it or not, we are using up precious resources. Now, it's very often necessary that we do, perhaps for the maintenance of our economy, make these trips. But we certainly should consider them, reduce their number as far as possible, and choose wherever we can less frequented highways. It may take a little longer, but the individual may live a little longer. We cannot afford to carelessly waste life, because this energy cannot be continuously renewed. We are gradually wearing out, whether we know it or not. And it is desirable for most people that they wear out as slowly as possible. So we have to keep this type of thinking constantly in mind. Realizing always that there are certain basic confusions from which we can constantly suffer, it is also important, therefore, that we develop basic attitudes which will help to simplify confusion. One of the most important of all basic attitudes is to simplify our wants, to bring them within a pattern of graciousness and at the same time a pattern of practicality. Competitive wanting is one of the dangers of our time. The individual wants too many things, and having them, he has to live with them, and they gradually exhaust him. So it is in all these different problems that we face that we should, regardless of prevailing attitudes and prevailing tendencies and prevailing policies, we should always work for an economy of energy, an economy of the unnecessary, reducing things to their most gracious and natural possibilities. To do this, we may have to stand a certain amount of public criticism. We will not be understood if we do not conform. So we have to decide somewhere along the line whether we wish to conform and be exhausted, or be misunderstood and have a little more energy to do the things we want to do. In the last analysis, there's probably nothing more dangerous than being understood. Socrates pointed that out. On one occasion, after one of his discourses, there was a wild burst of applause from the audience. Socrates was greatly disturbed. He said, "What foolish thing have I said that so many people should appreciate it?" Now, this business of trying to conform is just about that. We conform with people whose taste is no good in the first place. We follow policies that have never produced anything for anybody. And because we have the applause of others who are no wiser than ourselves, we consider that we have achieved something. Let us get away from all of this type of thinking and get down to the kind of thinking that really will profit us, will give us true energy release. One thing to do, perhaps, is to divide our belongings and possessions into the kind of things that help us and the kind of things that hurt us. Let us get rid, first of all, of the things that hurt. Because hurt, pain, is an energy-destroying thing. Not only do we lose energy from pain, but we lose energy from the fact that nature has to throw more energy in to help us to recover from the pain. So we lose both ways. So look around you. If you have things around you that are associated with negative attitudes, negative thoughts, negative reactions, get rid of them. Get rid of things that cause you a negative response by their very existence. Even though you may cherish them, even though you may regard them as valuable, pass them on to other people who perhaps can enjoy the things because they do not have the personal association factors which make these things dangerous to you. Time and time again, someone will take the old family Bible into a second-hand bookstore. The book dealer will look it over and say, "Well, what do you want for it?" The person who owns it says, "Well, that was Father's Bible, and he got it from his father. That Bible has been in our family for 75 years. It's priceless." The book dealer looks it over again and says, "Probably. I'll give you 50 cents for it. Now that is how priceless it is. And that's just how priceless it really is to the owner. The rest of it is all sentiment. We don't realize when we nurse these old belongings that the Bible perhaps reminds us that grandfather was no good and father was only a little better. On the front page are all our relatives' signatures who have died. Also, it reminds us of misfortunes and situations that have arisen in the family for 3 generations. But to a person who buys the book from the book dealer, this is not important. So another individual can enjoy the fine old Bible, while that same book is hurting us. So the book dealer should have it for 50 cents. In fact, we should pay him a couple of dollars to take it. Because in so doing, we have saved a part of our own energy. Now, if we have gradually emancipated ourselves from this family background so that the book merely stood there because it was a fine old Morocco-bound volume, it gave a certain sense of dignity. There are many people who feel a fine old Bible should be out somewhere, visible in every dignified home. If it has lost its power to hurt, it still has not lost its power to perhaps clutter. When a very nice, new, simple book, neatly bound, that would go on the shelf properly, would carry the same importance to us and be perhaps a great release from this old, odd-shaped, massive family tome. So while we have sentiment about these things, this sentiment can sometimes add to our misfortune. The same is very true of old family portraits and things of this nature. They are meaningless to anyone but ourselves. They're meaningless to the whole world when we're gone. But if they are in any way dragging down our psychology of life, if they are becoming difficult for us to live with, if they are difficult for us to ship from place to place and dust every day, then Simplification says that all of the things, the symbols, the principles for which these old pictures stand have their own life and their own value. We are not disrespectful. We are not in any way endangering the values. If these portraits represented people we knew and admired, their real portrait is in our own soul. And if there was nothing in their lives that put them into our hearts, then there is no use keeping their pictures on the wall. Little by little, we can get rid of these things. Little by little, we can weed out elements that are of no particular value. Knickknacks also call for weeding every once in a while. Knickknacks, like art, are things that we outgrow. Anything that we outgrow and keep, we have to serve. It no longer serves us in any way. It is simply a dust catcher. So if we have outgrown it, pass it on to someone else who needs it. If a quality of art that we no longer regard as great still remains in our possession, move it along. If it doesn't do anything for us, the blank place where it stood is more important. If it is still serving us, if it makes us better people, keep it. If it doesn't make us better people, move it on. There's somebody who needs it. And if in the course of this procedure we discover that we have new needs, then we sometimes have to make a very definite decision in life. If something of beauty, something of fineness has developed in our lives, if we suddenly sense a need for music, if we suddenly sense a need for paintings or art or sculpturing, then we may have to add things. But we have to add them because we need them. We have to add them because they serve our consciousness, or that we feel that we are elected to protect them for a common good. We have to have motives and reasons and values that are adequate. And where anything has ceased to be valuable, then we must let it go. If we hold on to it beyond the point of value, we are destroying something of our own integration. We are losing our own values. And most of all, we move this away from the things around us to the things within us. and we try to simplify our way of life. In the development of private philosophies, we are apt to get into the danger of complexity. We are liable to have 2 or 3 different systems of belief that do not agree, but we like them all. Therefore, at one time or another, we try to apply them all. And because they do not work together, we frequently create confusion, which would not be true if we had integrated our own concepts in the first place. One of the most important elements in the simplification of life is, therefore, the clarification of our religious philosophical principles. We have to have them in a way that we can understand them. If we do not understand them clearly, we will misunderstand them continuously. If they are not understood also, they do not have a dynamic for us. When we have a mass of beliefs which are but poorly digested, none of them really serve us. We find our memories being used to perpetuate these beliefs rather than to gain courage from them. If we have to defend beliefs, we are in trouble, because a belief which we have only understood to the degree that we have to defend it is not serving us. We are soldiering for it. Actually, the things that are true need no defense. They cannot be assailed. No individual has to ever defend a principle. All he has to do is exemplify it, and this saves a tremendous amount of energy. Also, where we find that other people do not agree with our principles, do not see things our way, we frequently go on to the energy defensive. We try to force their understanding. We do it with the best meaning in the world. We want them to be better people. We know they're in trouble and we'd like to get them out of trouble. But it usually ends up by our getting into the trouble. We cannot force enlightenment. We cannot press insight upon another person. And if we try at all, if there is any hope of success or any hope of contributing anything, it must be on the level of absolute simplicity. The individual must use only the simplest of his faculties to understand us with. If we can get our thoughts so very straight and so very simple, perhaps we might reach him in part. But the more complicated our ideas are, the more certainly he will never be able to understand them. In the same particular problem, we have to decide in our own minds what we can use out of wisdom. There are many great principles in life which we can learn, but we can never use them. It is far better for us to admit they exist and not spend too much time on them. Because if we spend too much time on them, we will never have any time to use the principles that we do have need to apply in our daily lives. So never allow abstractions, never allow vast cosmic problems to become so important that we have no time to do the things that immediately need doing. Now, in study, we have this problem constantly in front of us. Study is a fascinating thing, especially in religion and philosophy. And we are very much inclined to take a philosophy that interests us and carry it too far into abstraction. We study it day after day after day and night after night. I know people that study 6 and 8 hours a day. They have studied so industriously they haven't had a moment in which to apply anything that they've learned. They have stored up a lot of treasures, but I'm afraid not in heaven. They have stored them up in their own minds, and they become tremendously excited about it. But these same people become very unhappy when they observe a scientist becoming absorbed in some scientific problem of his own that seems important to him but not to other people. But you can do the same thing in religion and philosophy. You can become so involved in a situation that you never have a time or opportunity to work with it. Now, it's very interesting to learn, for instance, the mysteries of first cause and of ultimates, and to try to plumb the infinite nature of deity and things of this kind. They become fascinating problems. Even these, however, are not the worst complications. The worst complications lie generally in the middle distances. We may come to the conclusion that a certain kind of primordial principle resides at the source of life. In other words, we may come to our definition of deity. Now, this definition of deity can help us, because after all, deity to the average individual is an ideal statement. It is a statement of the best that he knows and the most that he is, and in some way it ties into his entire ethical, moral, spiritual conviction. If he can get a truly clear concept of his own idea about God, it tells him most of what he needs to know about himself. It tells him most of what he needs to know about how he should grow and how he should think and how he should build. So this basic conviction is usually good, and most religious philosophies make strong point of the importance of it. But then we pass into this great mystery, which no one has ever been able to completely solve to universal satisfaction, and that is the outflowing of this deity, the infinite manifestation of it in the infinite processes of life. These processes are too complicated for us to understand, too remote for us to be able to grasp, and usually too abstract for us to use even if we understood them. So we have to have a watchfulness. We may want a skeletal outline of how we believe things happen. We may want a few brief definitions of the processes of the cosmos, but we do not want to get so involved in this that we gradually find ourselves falling into a strange kind of orthodoxy. It may be a heterodox kind of orthodoxy, a private one, but it is still infinitely orthodox to us. And in the interesting mental speculations that arise from these things, we gain a tremendous exhilaration when we think we have solved something. We gain a tremendous sense of enthusiasm, almost a mystical apperception, when we believe that we have been able to take some abstraction and fit it into another abstraction. Or that it seems as though we have discovered some abstract principle of yoga or something of that nature. It all seems perfectly fascinating, and we can go on and make a life out of this. We can make a life of simply putting together the intricate parts of a strange pattern. When we put it together, it satisfies us. It may not satisfy anyone else, but it is our solution, and we have a series of mental experiences. But what we have forgotten entirely is that we are simply doing a kind of mental gymnastic. We are employing the mind. We are completely concerned with these mental processes, and yet these same persons are being imposed upon by their relatives. They are unable to take care of their own common daily affairs any better than they did before. And the advice which they give to others from this vast structure of their own thinking is an abomination in the majority of cases. They simply do not make the adjustments. They're using a tremendous amount of energy, a vast amount of time, trying to create a universe. I know people, for example, who have spent a lifetime trying to decide what life was like on the other side of the grave. They really didn't have to. They'll find out in due course. They would have been much wiser had they tried to find out what life was on this side of the grave. Because here is where they have to live now. When the time comes, they'll find those answers. But they must not overlook the importance of now. So I think it is quite true what the mystic has found out and what we find in Zen and certain other philosophies, that namely the experiences that we need to have in the form of insight come to us very simply and very naturally if we will relax. It is true that we need a basic pattern of law. It is true that perhaps every individual in the course of a lifetime should have a conviction that is based upon, we might say, 300 or 400 hours of fairly careful thinking. During the course of a lifetime, this is not too much. It means that we have gradually come to certain principles by which we are not going to be deceived or overwhelmed by the superstitions around us. But having gotten our principles straight, I think we come very close to this problem in following the concepts taught by Buddha, namely that we are not to go off into this infinite consideration of abstraction, but we are to take all knowledge that is available to us and apply it immediately to the problem of our own existence. Unless we solve something in ourselves, our knowledge is vain. Therefore, we need only that much abstract knowledge as is necessary to create a practical, concrete pattern that is suitable to protect us from common error and to keep our minds and hearts and natures dedicated fairly closely to the essential principles of daily existence. So that energy says that we can't afford too much abstraction. I've known several instances in which persons who spent too much time in these abstract situations actually came to an acute state of mental fatigue. I know one individual who finally passed through what was almost equivalent to a mental stroke. This person exhausted the energy of the thinking process until he had a violent disability in this area. It did not mean that he lost his mind. He did not. But it meant that from that time on he was simply unable to do any more of that kind of thinking. He ran into immediate fatigue. Nature was telling him he'd done too much in the first place, but he wouldn't believe it until nature stepped in and forced him to stop something which in itself was no longer profitable or necessary to him. So we do realize the importance of keeping learning within the range or area of things that can be done with it, and never permit it to simply exist completely for its own sake. If we could do the same thing with the common daily knowledge that we have, we could finally end by conserving resources through using knowledge. When we use so much energy getting the knowledge, we have practically no resource left with which to apply it. So this is something that every student should bear in mind, namely that to get the principles clear and then apply them simply to simple, normal objectives of life. And so we find that the simple ways to achieve ends is to discover, for example, that we are in a universe of law and order. In a few hours, if our consciousness is reasonably awakened, we can become aware of this universe. We can sense it around us. We can become addicted to the conviction that there is a universe of principles operating. Having come to this point, we have all that is necessary in the abstract. Now we have to begin to make these principles work in operation, learning how to live within this grand pattern that we have sensed to be true. And this grand pattern is comparatively simple. One of the common factors, for instance, that we have out of the concept of Buddhism, at the time when the Siamese government, or the government of Thailand, issued its official bulletin for the 2500th anniversary of the birth of Buddha, it contained within the booklet one very simple statement, a statement that perhaps summarized Buddhism as well as anyone could summarize it. Just 3 words: purify the mind. Now that doesn't take a great deal of wording to get that far. You see, you can write that down or think that up or remember that in a few minutes. But that's only the beginning of the problem. The problem then is do it. And the problem of doing it is the great application of wisdom. To purify the mind means to relieve the mind of all that of its own thinking which is destructive. To purify the mind means to reduce the waste of energy in the mind to the point that every part of mental energy is used to advance individual and collective good. This is a tremendous thing in itself. It is so simple as a term. Very few persons who would think of the term would not be able to understand it well enough to get a sensing of what it means. So simplification can begin with this process of purifying the mind. And by purifying the mind, we say to ourselves, what is pure and what is impure? And we must come finally to the decision that everything that is destructive, everything that is hurtful, everything that is negative, everything that is unfair, everything that is unjust, everything that is unkind, must in some way or another be impure. If we could really take that simple thought and apply it to our lives, we would gradually create a tremendous overtone of value. And this overtone would make life much simpler. It would make energy much more available to us and would prevent most of the wasting of energy, which is now due to our mental attitudes. To purify the mind implies also, in general, to redeem the emotional content of the mind, so that thoughts and emotions will be pure. If thought and emotion are pure, action will be pure. If these things are clear and right and simple, then all values will be what they should be. And by this very process in itself, we would come to the simple life. Not the simple life of the individual who goes out in the forest and tries to live on acorns, but the simple life of the civilized being whose entire attention is centered upon values, upon those things which by the doing of them achieves the greatest, wisest, noblest, and most virtuous applications of energy. The simple way, then, for every individual is to gradually take destructiveness out of his concepts, out of his life, out of his way of thinking. How will he be able to discover destructiveness? Well, one way, I think you could do it, but I think it would be a rather tedious one, and that is to use a tape recorder. If, for example, an individual would keep a tape running through the day of his life, particularly if he could live just the same way, not trying to accommodate to this tape, but simply living as he normally does, he would learn in a few hours, or a few days certainly, what was destructive in what he was doing. The first place, he would find out what hurts his own voice. He would hear sharpness, bitterness, anger. He would hear impatience and sense the emotional destructiveness of it. Nature will tell him very simply that anything that he has to express in an unpleasant way must be in itself wrong. He will realize that when he is kind and sympathetic, his voice is kind and sympathetic. And that in this kind and sympathetic voice, he wins friends. He makes people respect him. He is recognized as a kindly, benevolent person. And then comes that tone of nagging. He hears it himself. He won't like it. He will wonder how he gets along with it. And then he suddenly realizes that he's become so accustomed to himself that he no longer questions his own destructive uses of energy. But you can tell by the voice, you can tell by your own voice in the course of days, what is good and what is bad in what you are saying and the thoughts behind them. You can tell what is brittle, what is harsh. You can tell not only from the words, but from the way they are spoken. And you will make another interesting discovery, namely that wrong words nearly always have to be spoken harshly or unpleasantly. The words form their own kind of expression. When you are criticizing someone, you're not only saying something, but you are vitalizing what you say by a peculiar symbolic use of your own voice, by a pressure upon your own wording and thinking. So you will find pressured words. You will find words that are barked out rather than spoken. You will find words that obviously come too rapidly to be well thought. You come to all kinds of semantic peculiarities. And in a very short time, you can tell yourself what you are saying that is good and what is not good. You can learn your own bad habits. You can also learn how you can say a true thing so badly that it is worse than a lie. You can learn how you can take all the beauty out of the Ten Commandments and out of the Sermon on the Mount if you use it bitterly to attain some end of your own. You learn that behind words are inflections, tones, that represent the degree of your own conscious participation in the understanding which you may claim to possess. You will also realize that as you gain understanding and insight and interior control, that you will speak quietly, that you will speak gently, that you will not shout, that you will not try to dominate conversation. And from the very way you speak, you can find out which of your words are valuable and which are not. You will gradually realize that as you relax internally, your words will be more beautiful. And because they are beautiful, they will be more valuable. It is not necessary to increase a vocabulary in order to say what you really believe. The very simplest of words become garlanded with beauty and with meaning and with overtones if they are used from a great source of spiritual strength within yourself. So little by little, through the observation of your own ways, you can find out how you are wasting energy. You can find out that every destructive thought and emotion is a waste, that every unkind word is a waste because it is producing nothing. What tears down does no good. We like to think, of course, that we must be critics, that we must constantly pass judgment on things. This is not true. We only have to state the truth of the thing. Say it without belligerence, say it without any sense of personal displeasure. In the presence of the truth, that which is real will reveal itself. We do not need to fight with error. We do not need to argue with it. All we have to do is have the simple facts within our own consciousness. They will present themselves and defend themselves with a minimum of energy and a minimum of wasted effort. So we start in by trying to save these things. And we observe everything within ourselves which tires us out. We realize that whenever we have a bad mood, we have a period of depletion. So if you wake up in the morning someday and you feel unusually tired, a little bit off kilter, and you have this idea that you got out of bed on the wrong side, begin to think back and see if you didn't go to bed on the wrong side. Make sure that somewhere within the last few days you haven't broken the pattern of harmony. If you are having a bad time with energy, see if you cannot relate it to the fact that the day before you lost your temper, or that you did an unpleasant thing of some kind, or that you got stirred up emotionally or psychologically by some situation. I know people that watch the television for 2 hours and are sick for a week. Not because they necessarily have even watched horror plays, because there's nothing more horrible sometimes than a news release. But at the same time, if you take on all these things, if you get angry at everything, if you have no faith in anything, if you believe everyone's a liar, this type of attitude, you carry it for a while, and all of a sudden you're so tired. You're not only tired, but your digestion is ruined. Your elimination ties up. Every part of your nature begins to rebel. Very soon you are debilitated. You're not happy anymore. You're not healthy. Because you cannot be healthy in a life of criticism, no matter how hard you try. Now, you may believe this criticism is justified and that somebody's got to stand up and tell the truth. Everyone has to stand up and tell the truth. But if you quietly rise and quietly tell it, you're all right. But when you get up with a great deal of excitement and instead of telling the truth, spend all your time trying to point out that the other fellow is a liar, then your energy goes down. Because it's not supposed to be done this way. So wherever you find loss of energy, look back and see what you're doing that is wrong. If you're tired out all the time, there is something wrong in your conduct pattern. There has to be. Now, perhaps you are trying to carry too heavy a load. Although research indicates that responsibility well carried is seldom the cause of exhaustion. The cause of exhaustion is escaping of energy into areas where you cannot constructively control it. So again, simplification helps to bring these values into focus. We can face any problem that we can understand. Two individuals looking at a television program. To one of them, it is a very serious irritation. Another person looking at the same program with a different point of view may not be irritated. I know there are cases in which programs come along that are very difficult for some people to watch. Other people are grateful for the ideas that these programs stimulate, although the program itself might not be the direct cause of the association. But sometimes we learn things that helps us to know. If we can learn without tension, if we can accept without over-acceptance, without accepting anything that is not true, but if we can take all things that come to us and use them for the enlargement of our own insight, they can serve us, sometimes very indirectly, but definitely. If, however, we meet these things with resistance, we simply devitalize ourselves. So whenever we begin to note that the energy supply is inadequate, then comes the time to look back and see what we are doing that we no longer have to do. How we can get away from this complex situation by giving up a bad habit. If we do not give up the bad habit, it will lead us to the grave. There's no escaping. We cannot bargain with a bad habit. We cannot say we'll do what we please and correct it later. We have to face the inevitable consequences of action. If people would just realize this, and they could say to themselves very sharply, very definitely when the need arises, it would be very nice at this moment for me to get mad at someone. But I can't afford it. I simply cannot afford it. Or at some other occasion we say, well, that person over there is talking, making a perfect fool out of himself. I think I'll go over and correct him. I think I will talk louder than he does. I will say all kinds of things more rapidly than he can say them, and I'll show how wrong he is. Then we have to pause to decide which one of the biblical admonitions we are going to follow. And the Bible is so convenient in these matters. I remember two verses bearing on this subject. One says, answer a fool according to his folly. And not far away is another verse, answer not a fool according to his folly. You can make your own choice. But I think either way you think of it is that the answer is as foolish as the fool himself. So we can decide where our values lie. We can look at problems and we can say the principles are thus. The principle of this matter is that I should have tolerance. At the moment I feel exactly as though I'd like to be intolerant, but I can't afford it. We cannot afford to break the rules. We cannot afford in the smallest thing to break them. The parent can't afford to break them in working with the child who wears it out and worries it to distraction. It isn't the child who causes the distraction finally. It's the fact that we become tired, we are fatigued, we can no longer handle these things. But if we can achieve a quietude within ourselves, we can handle them. And whenever we have an outburst, even though it is the most righteous form of indignation, we have hurt something. Nature does not want it that way. Nature does not want negative vibrations to be released into space by anybody for any reason. Everything must be cured by an insight greater than the problem. And if we grow bigger than the problem, we can solve it simply and directly. If it is greater than we are, it is unsolvable, no matter how loudly we shout. So we save energy, conserve resources, reduce tension, and try to keep all of our vital resources for the long pull. If we have to use energy, we want to use it creatively. If we want to use it creatively, it's far better for this energy to be used in the writing of a beautiful poem, or in the making of a wonderful painting, or the molding of a beautiful piece of ceramics. Whatever energy we have should be used for good purpose. If we use it for good purpose, nature will not penalize us. Now, it seems sometimes, and I know that I know a case where a person really had a wonderful time being disagreeable. They really did a splendid job of it. They enjoyed every moment of it. They got a fiendish look in their eye when they were saying something that hurt somebody. It was a look of triumph if they could get the other person discomforted. This individual couldn't reason with. They liked it that way. They never had so much fun in their life as when they were trying to embarrass somebody else. After about 20 years of this, they landed, as most people do with this type of a problem, in the psychiatrist's office. And from that point on, they didn't have any fun at all. From that time on, they were miserable. They discovered gradually, at great expense, that this attitude had led the way to another vast span of time, 10 or 15 years it took, getting over having fun doing the wrong thing. This person finally reached the point where their temperament was completely out of control. They had destroyed the integrity of their lives, doing what they wanted to do. And then came that great period of repentance. But repentance is expensive. It is not easy to repent your problems over a period of years at $25 an hour. You begin to wish you'd thought differently. So wherever there seems to be any reward for the wrong thing, let us always bear in mind that it is accumulative, and that it will ultimately get us if we do not change our ways. So simplicity also points out to us the importance of the fact that simple, direct things are easier to get over. If we make a small, quiet mistake, we may survive it. If we make a loud enough one, we're in a very bad way. If we make minor errors due to poor judgment, but our hearts are in the right place, and we have not become unpleasant, if we have not forced a negative situation unduly, we can correct small mistakes. The individual making a hesitant brushstroke or a pencil line can erase it if need. But if he covers the whole paper with the wrong design, then he has to throw it away and start over again. In psychology, we see so much of this tremendous impulse art, where the individual is simply fighting constantly with this desperate determination to achieve certain purposes. These purposes are wrong, and the individual is in trouble all the time. We can imagine the ideal situation, if it could be possible for man to attain it. An ideal situation of gracious living, of gracious, simple relationship with life, of the individual who finds that the simplest and most gracious types of environment, simplicity in clothing, simplicity in attitude, to live simply, to eat simply, to think simply, but deeply, to fill all available part of life that is ours to fill when the responsibilities are finished, with gracious, simple, quiet, gentle activities. We think probably we'd be bored to death, but we wouldn't after once we become accustomed to the joys of reflection and peace and harmony. Western man has so little experience of the beauty and desirability of peace. To us, everything has to be shattering. It has to be colossal. It has to be dramatic. Therefore, we are the most tired people on earth. We take more stimulants and more sedations in this country than all the rest of the world put together, simply because we are under constant pressure. If we reduce life to a livable state, if we have the quietude to sit down, read a little while, think a little while, maybe have a small garden, do a few things in it, write a poem, quietly and gently contemplate the tremendous values of life, have one or two sincere friends and share with them without trying to overwhelm them, and little by little reduce life to a livable state, the individual will then have a great deal more energy for valuable things. He would also find that instead of being bored by this simplicity, that for the first time he is able to enter into a deeper relationship with value. Life becomes more interesting every day when we simplify it. He would also find that his mind will turn from matters of little importance to things which are of greater substantial value, things which have lasting meaning. That instead of worrying, he will use this same time to understand, which is the important thing. Not so much that we learn all the time, but that every day, every opportunity broadens the foundations of understanding. Understanding is meaning. It is the putting of meaning into things, or the discovery of the true meaning that is in them. The life lived in meaning is terribly important. And this meaning can only come when we are quiet enough to accept it, to investigate it, to consider it, to seek for it. If you are looking at a picture, maybe you go to a great gallery and you see a fine painting. The first time you look at it, you don't understand it. You can't. You gain a certain tremendous overall sense of that picture. But it is only after a long time that this picture really begins to mean something to you. I had a friend many years ago who was a great authority on Wagnerian music, which is a difficult music. Wagner has many friends and enemies in music, but this individual particularly liked that which has later been demonstrated or gradually came to be recognized as Wagner's greatest achievement, and that is the Tristan and Isolde music. This person said that they really began to understand Tristan after the 50th listening to the opera. After listening 50 times with the score, they began to know what it meant. Now, it's the same thing in travel. If you go to a country and stay 2 weeks, you are an authority on it. If you live there for a year, you know nothing about it. If you live there for 20 years, you begin to understand it. So whatever you're doing, you cannot instantly command it. You cannot take any subject that is of any value and simply eat it whole, devour it. You have to live with it. You have to relax to it. You have to allow its meaning to grow and unfold within yourself. And the only way this can happen, whether it's philosophy or religion or science or psychology or art or music or literature, whatever it may be, you have to become a friend of what you want to understand. You have to gain a quiet, honorable relationship. You have to give time to it and thought to it and a certain amount of basic energy to it. If you're hurried all the time, if you're constantly changing from one subject to another, if you're meeting every emergency with every available ounce of energy, you can never get under the surface of anything. Your energy is all gone, your time is all gone, wasted, used up, dissipated, without any production whatever. If, however, you can simplify life to the point that you have a few hours now and then, hours that have been rescued from trivia, hours that you once used to worry with, hours that you once used for argument or dissertation on useless subjects, hours that were once spent trying to take care of too great an establishment, trying to work too hard for an extravagant code of life that you could do nothing with anyway. If you can rescue this time, you can then sit down quietly with it. And with this quietude, you can begin to understand things. You can begin to penetrate into the source of things. And every amount of energy that you conserve by the simplification of life gives you penetrating power in areas where you really want to know something. You can quietly understand friendship, but it will take years. You can quietly understand the needs of children, but it will take time. It takes time and relaxed energy. But quietly understanding, thinking, bringing together all the insight that you have, you can do these things peacefully, in an orderly way, without destruction. And a half hour of very quiet recognition of the values of a situation may save you a half-hour mental or emotional outburst the next day. The quiet energizing, the quiet visualization of the situation took a few units of energy. The anger arising from not understanding takes hundreds of units of energy. So by solving these problems quietly, you lengthen your own life expectancy and increase your usefulness. Most of all, also, however, you come nearer to the true solution, inasmuch as the true solution must come from quiet thoughtfulness. So simplicity simply takes away all of these factors that are not very valuable. And by reducing the waste, you rescue time and energy for yourself. By ordering confusion, you rescue your own peace of mind. For when you gradually eliminate confusion, you can think. The person who is mad one minute and happy the next is unable to think. It is only when we are quiet, when we have a deep, well-organized rhythm of life, that we can ever get at the values of things. So by simplifying away the confusion, simplifying away the things that have no real meaning, we come in the end to a very simple approach to the things that have real meaning. And out of this comes solution. And out of solution comes regeneration of character and code and conduct. And we really find that it is possible for us to be enlightened human beings. Man has so many wonderful values in him that he never permits himself to express. And he keeps the surface of his nature so agitated by the winds of circumstance that we never know the deep ocean of value that lies underneath. But when we simplify, then we become aware of the depth of the human being. By simplifying our attitudes, we understand better these depths. And by approaching the other person with these simplified attitudes, we understand his depths. We get beneath this tendency to criticize or condemn or to pass quick judgment. And we begin to sense the human being was there. And out of this comes experience and insight and understanding. So make life as smooth as you can. Quiet it down. Put it in order. Get rid of the things that will never pay off. Get rid of the attitudes that will never permit you to think. Get rid of the emotional pressures that will never permit you to love or be a friend to anything. Reduce these. Bring them down to their quietudes, to their simple honesties, to their natural directness, and you will not only live longer, but the years of life will be richer, and you will have better health in those critical periods when the person who has wasted energy no longer has any available at all. So if you want to have happiness ahead, relax now. If you want to have more energy later, save it now. If you want to have greater insight tomorrow than you have today, relax, simplify life, and bring to tomorrow a personality as far as possible free from ulterior motives and ulterior pressures. If you can do that, you won't have nearly as many health problems to face as those who are thoughtless. Simplicity pays off. It pays off every day. Well, time is up, so I think we'll have to bring this to an end. Well, now we have a few announcements that I think we'll want to make. First of all, we have a little booklet called 10 Rules, Basic Rules for Better Living, which we think will help. Don't forget to let us have your names for the mailing list. If we are not sending you a program regularly, we would be very happy to do so. Our most recent publication is Words to the Wise, which is available on the table, and as it has been out of print for very many years, the chances are it would be a useful Christmas present to friends who you know have many of our other writings. The chances are they do not have that one. I might also announce that in our gift shop we have several things. Now, I've been away in San Francisco ever since Thursday morning, so I don't know what this is all about, but it says here that there are some Christmas fruitcakes in the gift shop. And as I should not have them, you can well understand that it's not at all desirable for me to have fruitcakes. I hope you will buy them so that there won't be any left to tempt me. So anyway, I think you'll have an interesting time looking them over. Don't forget the gift shop. You also will find some last-minute things such as cards and small presents for your friends, or a gift certificate which will enable them to come in and select something they might like after Christmas if you're not sure what they would like. Also, let me remind you of the library. We are still exhibiting the story of the Word, which has had very wide recognition as being an important educational exhibit. So we hope you will see or go there and visit this record of nearly 5,000 years of man's effort to express his own convictions. And speaking about this expression, there is some very wonderful simplicity. One of the great things about the scriptural writings of most people is that of all literature, they are the most simple. There are more ideas contained in 1- and 2-syllable words in the New Testament than you will find almost anywhere else in the literature of the world. The parables, the simple statements of things, these are the things that live. And when we can begin to think simply, we begin to think with the ages. We begin to think of those things that endure. We think you will enjoy this exhibition in the library, and we hope you will visit there. And you will also find a number of prints and interesting objects which might perhaps also serve your Christmas shopping. On Wednesday evening of this week, there will be no lecture here, but the gift shop will be open Wednesday evening for those who might have a little time at that time. And I'm not sure, but I suspect that if friends on Wednesday evening should want to see the library, that would also be possible. So we hope that you will be interested in the various books and publications that we have, to use them as Christmas gifts or magazine subscriptions, which you may find helpful. Give ideas if you can. That's much better than another necktie. The fellow already probably has one. It's too late now, really, perhaps, to buy our books and read them first and then give them to your friends, which we recommend for the thrifty-minded. But you have another out also. Buy them now, give them to your friends, borrow them afterwards, and read them. Anyway, do as much of your shopping as you can with us. Thank you very much.